Hello, I'm Gavin Hoey and this is the Technique of the Month from Digital Photo Magazine. Now this month we're giving away yet another fantastic free photo template, but this one has a real big twist. It's not something basic and simple. It allows you to experiment with both monochromatic effects and framing effects simply by using one template. But before we get onto the template, we've got to get a picture to go in it. And I've chosen this portrait here, but of course you don't have to use a portrait, you could use any picture you like. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to come up to Select and choose Select All, and then Edit and Copy. So that's going to copy the main picture into the computer memory. We can get rid of the picture, we don't need it anymore, and we can open up the template. And this is it. It doesn't look very exciting, does it? It's just a grey blob on the screen. To see how this really works, we need to open up the layers. So if you can't see layers, go to Window and down to Layers. And when you do, you'll find there's a whole bunch of layers, and I do mean a whole bunch. There is, well, quite a lot of layers on there. But the really important one at the moment is the one right at the bottom. The active layer must be the bottom one. Can't stress that enough. If it isn't the bottom layer that's currently active, click it and you'll find that will become the active layer. Now that's important because we're about to paste a picture right at the bottom of the stack here. So let's go up to Edit and choose Paste, and that'll put our picture slap bang right at the bottom, or at least just above the blank layer, but that's absolutely the right place to put it. Okay, so next thing to do is to make sure this image fits into the template. Now it looks about right, but I'm going to just double check just to be on the safe side. So let's go to Image and Transform and Free Transform, and in fact it's just slightly too big. So I'm just going to resize this a little bit, just bring it in so it fits on like so. Now if you're using one of your own images, you may find you need to make it bigger or smaller. The chances of it fitting straight on are quite slim, but it's not a problem to do. And click the tick. And that, to be honest, is probably the most complicated of the entire process of using this template. The rest of it is kind of fun. So what we're going to do is to scroll up our layers right up to the top, and when we get to the top you'll find there are 5 layers at the top that look a little different to the normal layers. Now these are all called adjustment layers, and in this case they're going to adjust the colour. In fact, they're all going to remove the colour. What we need to do is to actually switch them on, because at the moment all the layers are turned off. To switch them on, we have to click the visibility icon. Now, it's hidden. It's this little square right here with nothing in it. But if I click in the empty square, it gets filled by an eye. The adjustment layer switches on, and in this case, the adjustment layer removes the color and gives us a mono image. And it's called mono on the layer as well, just to remind you. Okay, let's see what the other 4 do. We'll switch that one off and go to the next one down, which is a cool tone, which gives you a very, very slight hint of blue. That's actually quite nice. I like that one. The one underneath it is a much stronger colour, a sienna type effect, so a very much stronger blue colour. We'll switch that off and go down to the next one, which is warm tone, which is really nice. It's a monochrome, but it has a hint of warmth in it as well. That's very pleasant. Works particularly well on portraits. And underneath it we have the classic sepia effect. So we'll turn that on, which is again a much stronger, much more obvious colour. Again, works very well with portraits. Okay, so let's switch that one off as well. We'll go back to our colour image. A little note of advice here. All of these layers obviously remove the colour, but you can't combine them together. So if, for example, you want to have a warm tone, well, let's actually go with sepia because it's a bit more obvious. You want to have a sepia effect, but if you switch on the monochrome at the top, the one at the top will override the others underneath it. So make sure you only have one of these layers turned on at any one time. Okay, so that's the adjustment layers, but below that we have the really interesting stuff. Now this is where you can apply various framing effects to your image, and there's quite a few to choose from. Let's run down the list here. Let's start with the drawn line, the one at the top of the frames, and it adds a kind of freehand drawn little white line around the edge. Underneath that we have the same thing but in white, so you have a white edge going around it. And then we have a key line, which is just the classic white, straight, linear key line effect. We also have exactly the same one, but with a black key line. But of course, a black key line with a black background, well, you can't actually see it on this image. But of course, you can use these with your own pictures as well as the one we're providing. Now underneath that we have frame number 1. This is kind of an interesting framing effect. I like this one. This is sort of a painted effect. Gives that nice kind of brush strokey effect around the edges. And underneath that we have frame number 2, which is kind of a kind of Polaroid film type effect going on around the edge there, which is really nice. Now, underneath that, we have a couple of familiar things. Vignetting, we have a black vignette, which of course a black vignette on a black picture really doesn't show very well, but you can see it's just taken the detail away from her shoulders there, so that works okay. And underneath that, we have a white vignette to give a white vignette effect, which is very, very obvious on this picture. So that's the different framing effects, and they can all be used individually. So for example, if you want to turn on sepia and you want to turn on hand-drawn white, you can have a very, very quick kind of border and color effect, which is great. I like that. But with the frames, you can actually combine them. Now, I said earlier with the adjustment layers you can't, but with the frames you most definitely can. So I'm going to show you just a few of my favorite little combinations in here. Okay, let's switch those two off and we'll go up to the top and we'll make our color image just a nice classic mono image like that. Okay, let's come down to the key line and we'll add a little black key line like that. Oh, no, wrong one. That's the one I'm looking for. And then we're going to add frame number 2 underneath and give that nice kind of effect. So now you can actually see the black key line. You couldn't really see it before, but adding in frame number 2 means that you can. So that works very nicely indeed. You get this sort of creative border, and then outside it you have the much more kind of obvious, neat, regular border. So I think those two work very well together indeed. Okay, let's switch those off and we'll try something else. So this time we're going to put a sepia color onto our picture. And then we're going to add in the hand-drawn border around the edge, like that. I'm going to go with the black one with the white surround. And then we're going to add in frame number 1, which is that one there. And that one I really like. So you get this kind of painterly border effect going on, and then you get this hand-drawn rough border around the outside just to hold that all together. And with the sepia, I think that works very nicely indeed. But you can take this even further. That's a nice effect. But what if we turn on frame number 2 as well? Well, those two will combine quite nicely as well. So you have that kind of film effect going around the edge, but also in the corners you can just see that you've got these kind of feathery, rough edges. If I switch it off, you'll see what I mean. It just gives it a very slight distressed look around the edge. And I think that's really, really nice. And as a final one, I want to show you that you can be a little bit more creative with these borders as well. So let's turn all of those off and let's go with the sienna type. So we're going to give it quite a strong blue colour. And then we're going to give it the hand-drawn border around the edge. So let's put that one on. But rather than leaving it as the default setting, I'm actually going to adjust it. Now, I need to make sure I'm working on this layer. So I'm going to click the drawn layer white like that, and it's going to become our active layer, and I'm going to go to the opacity and just take the opacity down just a little bit, just down to about 70-80%, somewhere in that area. Now you can see that the effect is slightly reduced, but it's not reduced too much. But if I add in some more borders, let's add in frame number 1 and we'll add in frame number 2, now you can really see the effect starting to kick in, because where we reduce the opacity, it's no longer black around the outside, but it's the blue from the sienna type. So that's quite a nice little effect. And well, let's finish it off by adding yet another one of the borders. Let's add in the white vignette border, which is a little bit overpowering to say the least. But just like we did before, we can soften the whole effect down. First of all, click the layer to make it active, and then come up to the opacity for that layer and drop it down. And as I drop it down, you can see that the white vignette just blends in, so maybe around about 20-25%, somewhere in that area. So we get that nice feathered edges. That's a little strong 20, I think that's better. And that kind of works very nicely indeed. So you can build up different effects by taking each individual layer and gently changing the opacity. The effects are pretty much limitless. You can put all sorts of different effects on there. So have a little play, put your own images in and see what wonderful border effects you can create.